like to very briefly talk about house rules. If I can ask all of you to please switch off your microphones and switch off your cameras. And what will be important, they'll just make the sound better for everybody. And when we get to the part of the presentation and you want to send any questions at the end, just send a question on the chat platform, either privately to myself, Manuela Sanchez-Aragu, or to everybody. And without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the Spanish Chamber of Commerce President, Jose Maria Segurola, and the CEO of Caixa Bank in South Africa. Mr. Segurola, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Manuela. Welcome everybody. Today, in collaboration with the Italian Chamber, the Swiss Chamber, and the Belgian Chamber, we come with us, we have the honor of presenting our colleagues and the friends from ABSA, friends and platinum members of the Spanish Chamber of Commerce as well. So I'm sure that today we will be able to learn from their experience how to deal under these difficult circumstances. All of us, we are facing a very challenging times, not only in terms of business, but as well family. You know, it's not easy to deal with this situation. It's new for all of us. And meantime, I would like to announce as well to you that during our last AGM on Friday in Pretoria, our friend Cepo Incube from ABSA was elected as a director of a member of the board of the chamber, and this for sure will strengthen the excellent relationship between the Spanish Chamber and the Commerce and ABSA. Yeah, it's a good opportunity today to learn, as I was trying to explain you before. So let's move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jose Maria. And thank you for announcing that Cepo Ncube has become one of our directors on our board. We're very proud of this. I just want to share with you a little bit more information about Cepo, because you will be dealing and interacting with her a little bit more in the future. Now, Cepo has a vast experience, and her experience in the banking industry spans over 18 years. So with that in mind, you can imagine that Cepo understands and is very passionate about what she does and how she helps organizations build their businesses and obviously contribute to the South African economic sector. Currently, Cepo is the head of the global clients for South Africa, focusing on multinational corporates within ABSA corporate and investment banking. And these businesses actually focus on global connectivity and deliver pan-African banking solutions locally and regionally to global clients, based investing in or in tradition across Africa. And apart from that, Cepo is very passionate about giving back to the community. And she currently sits on the Columba Leadership, an NGO organization that has produced, and Cepo, I'm very proud about this because it talks to my heart, over 6,500 graduates in 160 schools across the 6 provinces. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Cepo, who will be introducing our speakers this morning. Cepo, over to you.
Thank you, Manuela. On behalf of ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking, I'm greatly honored. In fact, we're greatly honored to participate on the CSCC. I'm also looking forward to be a valuable member to the Spanish Chamber Board. Our topic today is one that talks to how we as ABSA have continued to support our clients as well as the broader communities in which we operate in during this crisis. We also will hear from Gransolar, a client of ours, who've managed to navigate the pandemic. Dylan will also speak about the support that he's received from ABSA. I don't want to take away much from the speakers, and without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker, Jeff Gable, our chief economist, also head research of fixed income, currencies, commodities, voted Best Research House by the JSE Inspire Awards. He's won this, his team have won this over the last 4 years. He has a Joburg-based team that covers macroeconomics, foreign exchange, interest rates, and credit for South Africa, as well as other markets within the continent. Jeff has 25 years experience covering emerging markets, and he's also worked for the likes of Deutsche Bank in London, as well as the IMF. Our clients truly appreciate Jeff's independent views when it comes to the economy, and I'm sure he will share with you why I call it independent views. Jeff, over to you. Thank you.
Listen, thank you. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to leave my camera off for 2 reasons. One, I've been working from home now since the middle of March, and so I increasingly look like I live under a bridge. But also I'm going to share some slides here. So first, buenos dias, buongiorno, guten morgen, bonjour. I hope I've covered most of our languages here from the various chambers that have been introduced. I've been given sort of 15 or 20 minutes here to talk a little bit about sort of the environment that we find ourselves in, and what the next steps of sort of this economic downturn in the health-related crisis might look like. It's not a very upbeat topic, but I think it's absolutely critical. So with no further ado, let me sort of step in here a little bit to the slides. So first, just a quick introduction of who we are as a research team. And the takeaway from this slide is that, listen, we are covering Africa, between sort of a detailed coverage on South Africa and the coverage of about 15 markets elsewhere on the continent. The research team of more than 25 people at ABSA, I think, has us pretty nicely covered. And with the bit of marketing you've just heard, I'm very pleased to say that we've been voted Best Research House 2019, 2018, 2017, so in quite a substantial way. I won't go through the detail of sort of who covers what, but it gives you a sense of the sectors that we cover in sort of the breadth of our people, but more particularly beyond this call, our publications, sort of daily, weekly, monthly, sort of news-driven, company-driven, are available to clients of ABSA. We do expert sort of conference calls and roundtables. For example, about a week ago, we hosted in one call the South African finance minister with about 500 of the bank's clients. A little bit earlier that day, we hosted the governor of the central bank in Ghana. So really that Pan-African breadth. And then, of course, we have a whole bunch of conferences that are sector specific. So thinking about consumer-related items, mining-related items, small and mid-cap companies. So there's an awful lot of research available out there to help you with the decisions that you need to make on South Africa, Southern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and beyond on the continent. In terms of sort of the economic outlook itself, well, on the global side, frankly, it's not looking great, right? The data on the right-hand side is using forecasts from the International Monetary Fund. The red bars are the forecasts for the global economy, for the rich world, for Sub-Saharan Africa, made at the beginning of the year, their April update, and then their update from about 2 weeks ago. And you see an unprecedented change in outlook. For the world economy as a whole, it's more than 8 percentage points, the swing in growth outlook between where we were for 2020 at the beginning of this year and now. And the IMF is highlighting that the risks here remain very much predominantly to the downside. For the rich world, the swing is almost 10 percentage points. And even here in Sub-Saharan Africa, the swing is almost 7, minus 3% for Sub-Saharan Africa would be the first regional recession that we faced here on the continent since the debt crises of the early 1990s. So there is really something very dramatic going on here. We still don't know how far, how fast, how disruptive, how deadly COVID-19 ultimately becomes. We're trying to learn right now about the best ways to close economies when you need to, the best ways to open economies when it's that time, and whether we'll have to do this just once or in sort of a series of waves. And then, of course, everyone involved in business knows that this isn't sort of the normal demand shock only for economies. This is about supply and supply chains. This is about the containment measures as well. There's an awful lot going on all at once, and it really is very, very much unprecedented. Here in South Africa, right, our focus right now is sort of on the emergence of a very substantial health crisis. We know that in South Africa, we moved much faster than other countries. Our almost total lockdown that was announced at the end of March had been done on the announcement date, at least, before South Africa had suffered even a single death from COVID. So we were very much early in the process. We're doing a lot more testing. We'll be up to 2 million tests before the weekend here in South Africa. We know that after some an early period where hospitals weren't too busy, now is not the time to break your wrist cycling and having to go in and get medical attention. The hospitals are reaching capacity now with COVID-related challenges. We still don't know, frankly, in South Africa and across the continent, just what our population susceptibility is going to be. We know, on one hand, that we have a much younger population than certainly the rich world and many Asian economies, but we know that we have other challenges in terms of public health that may or may not hinder our progress in the fight against COVID. But more than anything else here, I think it's really this question of health versus economics. On the health side, the right thing to do when looked through the narrow lens of how do you get on top of the COVID pandemic and try to reduce the number of deaths to the absolute minimum, well, that is about locking down in a fierce way. Versus the economics, well, this isn't just a discussion we're having in Southern Africa, but it's a global one, recognizing that you simply can't have everybody locked down for long periods of time. The damage that's done to households, the damage that's done to business sector, the damage that's done to public finance is so great that the right answer is viewed through the lens of trying to get on top of the health aspects of the pandemic is often a direct conflict with the right answer to try to keep economies going. And certainly we're seeing that here in South Africa, as during the month of June, we had sort of our most significant relaxation of lockdown. At the same time, we're at new confirmed case counts of 9 or almost 10,000 a day. And the expectation is that this will continue to deteriorate in the coming weeks, that our peak is only likely to be sometime in sort of the second half of August as a country as a whole, or even into early September. What this does to the economics, well, gosh, not great is sort of the short answer. In the modeling work that a research team has done, we think that those sectors, and not for just the month of April when lockdown was more or less complete, not just the second quarter, but for the year as a whole, anything related to hospitality, and in the table here on the right, you see greater than 30%. But in fact, the hospitality sector as a whole is well in excess of 60% down this year in volume terms, all of 2020 versus 2019. And it will be a great number of years before many parts of that sector get back to the level of activity that we had back in 2019. The construction sector shut down almost entirely during the more extreme versions of lockdown. You're seeing some anecdotal restart now, particularly for those projects that are sort of well progressed, but the kick from sort of a loss of confidence, the kick from more difficult financing conditions is likely to mean that a dawn that we see in some parts of construction over June and July and maybe August, I think will probably dampen as we get a little bit further into this progress. Motor trade down more than 30% a year. You will see how the various sectors, and depending on your business, what part of South Africa you face across is sat here in the table. But really there's only two sectors at this top level look that have a positive number in front of them for this year. They're not in the table. One is agriculture. It's been a belter of a year for many parts of South African agriculture, but in part that's because 2019 was so difficult, 2018 was so difficult in terms of growing conditions, and agriculture normally follows a different cycle than other parts of the economy. And telecoms, as evidenced by the discussion we're having today, instead of being at the Anand club and helping to boost the hospitality industry, instead we're doing this all electronically. So telecoms does a little bit better, but more broadly, it's tough out there. Our forecast as a whole, we think that South Africa will shrink about 10% this year. We think that by the end of next year, if in January, when our restrained forecast in South Africa was that by the end of 2021, the country would be about 2 or 2.5% bigger than it was at the end of 2019, and bemoaning how slow that growth was and how difficult the business environment would be in an environment where the country was barely growing at all. Well, imagine the environment we face across now. We believe that by the end of next year, by the end, the country is still about 6% smaller than it was at the end of last year. And the opportunity set, depend upon what you're using as your forecasting model at the end of 2019 or early 2020 for your budgets, the opportunity set is just significantly smaller. And of course, in this space, there are an awful lot of downside risks, maybe some upside, but an awful lot of downside risks as well. For example, as we go into sort of the peak health crisis in South Africa, will government be able to leave the economy running in the way that it is now, or might we have to reintroduce certain restrictions? Will this just be one wave of infections and then we emerge out of it sort of blinking into the sunlight, or will there be subsequent waves? All of us globally are learning about this as we are doing. So there's an awful lot of uncertainty. Not to belabor the macro point, but I just want to highlight how different this crisis is. And what is true here for South Africa is true across the continent, and to an important extent true globally as well. How different this crisis is than other sort of recent events. So we think about sort of the global financial crisis, and I know that here in South Africa we got off a little bit more lightly than, say, European economies did, the North American economies. This graphic in front of you right now goes back about 90 years. So it goes all the way back to the Great Depression globally and takes us to where we are right now. And it's looking at sort of the annual performance of the South African economy, and you can see the flat bars, the flat lines, sort of the 10-year averages in that space. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is because the growth rates look so extreme right now, both the minus numbers that we're facing currently, but as we get to the third quarter and the fourth quarter in South Africa, we'll start showing some huge positive numbers. And those positive numbers might sort of trick us into thinking that the worst is behind us. But what I wanted to sort of highlight on is just how long it takes an economy to recover back to where it was before the big recession itself. And so that's why I wanted to use sort of this 90-year time span to give some of that context. So we think that the downturn that we're seeing just in the second quarter of 2020, we think that that downturn will take probably about 6 years before the South African economy will be back to the size it was before COVID hit us. So even though the growth rates will start to turn positive quite quickly, we think, that's largely a reflection of just how deep the hole was, rather than it is how quickly sort of new business opportunities are emerging. In context, the period immediately before South Africa's first democratic elections, there was a 3-year recession then. The economy shrunk year 1, year 2, year 3. Took 5 years to get back to where the economy had been in the late 1980s. The global depression, so the Great Depression from the early 1930s, South Africa shrunk for 3 years as a whole, but then grew very, very quickly, as did much of the world immediately after that. That took only 4 years to recover from. And right now, in South Africa's case, we think what's happening today will take 6 full years in aggregate. Some sectors recovering more quickly, of course, some sectors perhaps never recovering. So it's very dramatic what we're seeing. When we think about the rest of the continent, well, the rest of the continent has somewhat different linkages in the sense that commodities and sort of trade are typically more important per economy or per the size of the economy than they are in South Africa. Our domestic activity is just much bigger than elsewhere on the continent. Remittances, right? The recessions in a very difficult economic environment in Europe, in North America, and other parts of the rich world will mean that some of the big money flows that happen between family members coming from the rich world onto the continent, some of those are likely to slow, and that will very much impact consumer behavior and FX availability in some of these countries. And of course, tourism. So we know that in South Africa, the game reserves are empty. We know that it's not going to be very hard to find nice accommodation in Cape Town in December of this year, certainly as compared to 2018 or 2019. But if we think across the continent, the impact of tourism on countries like Botswana, Namibia, Mauritius, Seychelles, Kenya, Tanzania, going to be very, very substantial indeed. The graphic that you're seeing, sort of the first of the circles, that sort of dark gray, almost black color, is where our forecasts were for this year, for those countries at the beginning of the year. So for example, for Botswana, we thought Botswana would grow almost 4% this year. Our current forecast is the big red dot, and our modest downside risk are the orange dots. So for Botswana, for Seychelles, for Mauritius, all of those countries, we had been forecasting growth of near enough 4%, a little higher, a little lower for this year. Now we're all sort of -9, -10, -11 this year, and many years to recover. In this graphic, you'll see that the East African countries, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, tend to do better. Our base assumption is that they don't fall into recession this year. They simply grow much less quickly. But the critical message here is that everyone is impacted in a very substantial way. The I put out sort of a space, right? Is thinking about, as you think about that, is just kind of the size of pie per person, per capita.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
Manuela, we can hear you. Seems like we lost Jeff.
Yes, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, if you can just be patient for a few minutes, we'll get Jeff back online. Ladies and gentlemen, you are well aware, and I've been teaching on the master's program for years, technology always comes in and challenges us. So if we can just be a little bit patient, Jeff will be on pretty soon, back online. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, in the meantime, maybe while we get Jeff on, back online, can we just have some of the ABSA people just talking to us, and maybe this would be a good opportunity now to get the next speaker online. Tsepo, what are your thoughts, please?
Thank you, Manuela. I think we've heard from Jeff. I know he's trying to get on the line. We've heard from Jeff on the global outlook. Sorry, my video is off. We've heard from Jeff on the global outlook, as well as how it's impacted South Africa. And he was talking through, the continent, how that has also impacted the continent as well as the other sectors. And I would like to introduce the next speaker, Anand Naidoo, Managing Executive, Client CIB. Anand will share the journey on how the social economic challenges posted by COVID-19 emphasized the true value of identifying mitigating risks, developing contingency plans, and at the same time staying focused on the client base. Anand has managed to steer the ship and remain calm during this pandemic, a leadership trait that is needed during a crisis. Not only is Anand an effective leader, in his personal capacity, he's an advocate for education. He empowers the disadvantaged by paying for their tuition into top private schools. I hand over Anand to you. Thank you, Anand.
Okay, thank you, Sepal. I'm not sure if you can see me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Great. I think good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and hearty welcome and thank you for today. I think these are interesting times, but you've got to make the most of the situation and sort of plow ahead. So maybe if I can just speak a bit about our most recent successes and journey. So on the 6th of June, we celebrated our successful separation from Barclays Plc. In 2016, as you all know, Barclays announced their decision to reduce their shareholding in the ABSA Group, which began our 3-year journey of the separation program, which became actually one of the largest and most complex corporate projects of its kind, particularly on the African continent. I am proud to say that we came pretty much on budget and on time, something that very few people initially thought we would achieve. And you can imagine separating a very large regional bank out of a global bank is not a simple task. So quite proud of that achievement that we've just realized. I think overall we emerge from this chapter as a proudly independent African bank, strengthened and enriched by our experience we gained from being part of the global bank. We have a great foundation to build on and full control to make decisions that are right for customers in the various African markets. We're proud of our footprint that we have currently in 12 countries, so Ghana, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Botswana, Mozambique, Mauritius, Seychelles, and South Africa, and in almost all of these countries we are in the top 3, so quite a systemic bank to these economies. And then we've also got rep offices in Nigeria. We also have the ability now to execute a number of transactions in various non-presence countries in the African continent. So to cater for global clients such as yourselves, we have also established offices in London, covering the UK and Europe market, but also have just set up our office in New York as well. So I think moving on to COVID-19 and our approach within the corporate and investment bank. So as soon as this crisis hit us, we managed to establish 4 work streams which we thought were very important and need to be focused and led. The first one is the client work stream, which focused a lot around the client solutioning, critical advice that clients needed during this environment, a lot of liquidity support and rapid response, including on key aspects such as fraud and cybercrime, which has picked up, as you can imagine, quite massively in an online kind of world. The other key thing was us understanding the impact on our clients and their businesses, especially on some of the critical sectors that Jeff just spoke about, like construction sector, healthcare sector, which needs a lot of support, the leisure sector, and various others as well. But we needed to know, what clients needed from us on almost a daily basis. A lot of clients were wanting advice from us, etc. And that work is still continuing from our side. We also established the second work stream, which was our business continuity work stream, which focused a lot around the well-being of our employees. So the bulk of our employees, I would say about 80% of them are still working from home. But we also found that aspects such as mental health as well of our employees is quite critical and something that we take granted for, and we focused on that as well. And then obviously the operational stability of the business and the various the preparedness work streams to ensure that we cater for the various contingencies as well. Well, being a bank, we had to have a business work stream which also focused on our capital, our liquidity management of the bank. There's a number of clients that have higher risk profiles associated with the crisis, and we had to make sure that we manage our capital and liquidity accordingly. Last, and I think one of the very important work streams is the social good work stream, and Yasmin will cover this later on as well. So what we also needed to reflect on as a leadership team is that COVID-19 called for serious strategy changes in our business. So despite all the various crisis requirements that we've been asked to do, we also had to make time very quickly to look at what we call our strategy mark to market. And for this, we had to look at a lot of the situation in a sort of scenario basis, because we really don't know how the future is gonna play out for sure. And we grouped them into sort of 4 buckets in terms of what we are going to reconsider or even stop doing from our previous strategies, what we are going to pivot, what we are going to accelerate, and then very importantly, what are the new opportunities and needs that are emerging that we need to cater for. I think very importantly, something that our new CEO, Daniel Manele, is focused on is actually the key enabler for all of what I've just said, is around transforming of the culture of the organization. It's a big enabler. How do we ensure that we empower our staff to be comfortable to even take risks in certain situations and adapt to the change environment that we expect to see in the coming months and years. But very importantly, being a client person for most of my life, we realize that strategy actually starts with understanding what changes are needed from our clients' perspective, and what clients are going to require from us that's going to enable them to be successful going forward. So it's getting this constant dialogue with clients and understanding their businesses and their future predictions, etc. So there's a couple of themes that I could share that's emerging consistently from our client base. The obvious one, I think, is e-commerce and the online economy, the logistics that go with that. Many clients are completely relooking at their supply chains and how they configure that. A lot of them are actually divesting non-core assets, and they're doing it quite urgently to preserve capital and inject more capital into their businesses. There's also a lot of consolidation that's happening in the various sectors and segments that we bank. And some clients are actually looking at diversifying into new streams, so to ensure that that they don't have a concentration risk on a particular segment or sector, and are now redirecting capital allocation to what they consider some of the winning sectors in this particular environment. There's another theme that's developing, which is deglobalization, and by that I don't mean global corporates like yourselves not playing a very important role in the African continent. It's more moving to local manufacturing, local distribution, etc. We do know that in this environment, it is about survival in many respects. Unfortunately, there are going to be those clients that don't survive in this environment if they're not consolidated, etc. But a lot of them are looking at equity injections, not just debt. So we are very busy in terms of advising around that piece as well. But we also expect clients with more deep balance sheets and access to capital to play an increasing role and actually grow in this particular environment. And then the last topic that's emerging, which is proving to be very important, is the environmental impact, and how we factor that into our strategies as well. Many clients are rethinking, future growth developments, but are looking at configuring their new investments from an environmental perspective, but also from a sustainability perspective. So not just the environment, but other aspects such as education, water. I think there's about 17, sustainability development goals that various corporates are focusing on. So at ABSA, we've just decided to create a sustainability financing unit, an advisory unit, to advise our corporate clients on this particular theme that's emerging as well. So I'll leave it there. I think from my side, I would like to wish you all the best in terms of adjusting your strategies and navigating through this very tough environment. As ABSA, we are here to support you wherever we can. So please reach out, and we will try and we will do our best. So lastly, thank you for joining us today. I wish you all very good health, and please stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anand. We have Jeff back on Zoom. Jeff, if you don't mind, can you just take us through this last slide, and then I'll move on to the next speaker, Dylan Tudor-Jones from Gransolar. Thank you.
Sean, if you can just get on to Jeff's last slide, please, and then Jeff can speak to the last slide. Thank you.
Apologize. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we are hearing you now, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Listen, I've now told my same corny joke 3 times just to myself. So let's hope that when it comes time for that joke, I hit the punchline well here. I think that when I fell off the first time, we were just talking about the outlook for sub-Saharan Africa. So taking the discussion a little bit more broadly than South Africa. And in that space, sort of the message was for some countries like Botswana, Seychelles, Mauritius, impacted in part because of what's going on in tourism, but also other sectors. The impact this year was very large. Double-digit declines in the size of those economies in many years in order to claw that distance back. For some of the others, for example, countries in East Africa, the outlook may look less diminished. Many countries in East Africa are continuing to grow this year positively, but at much lower rates than before. And most broadly, what this means for the continent as a whole is that a lot of the progress that has been made over the last 2 and 5 and 10 and even 15 years around sort of the Millennium Development Goals, fighting poverty, uplifting sort of populations, really goes into pretty heavy reverse this year. So in the IMF's most recent work, they were highlighting that just this year's economic slowdown in some countries and reversal in others means that about almost 10 years of progress in terms of poverty alleviation on the continent disappears almost in the snap of fingers. So it's very, very substantial. And so the last thoughts I wanted to leave people with were kind of a summary of sort of the challenges ahead, and that's over the next couple quarters and the next couple years. So first and foremost, it doesn't matter what economy you're looking at, governments are pushing hard to sort of lean against the worst of the economic impact. We're seeing that through interest rates. We're seeing that through direct interventions trying to support lending to businesses. We're seeing that through infrastructure spending programs and others. So in that space, there's still just a question as to how effective that's going to be, whether governments will be able to maintain sort of that acceleration, and whether that acceleration lands in the right places. There's a broader question here where what will a post-COVID economy look like? So it's certainly not the case that all sectors will aspire to go back to where they were before. Some businesses, those businesses that will be most impacted by social distancing, won't look the same for a very long time, if indeed ever. And so I use as that example sort of, the holiday season in Cape Town. This isn't a one or done impact on that, but more broadly, different sectors impacted in different ways, business models being impacted in very permanent manner. There's a question here around household and business confidence, because of course, it's all well and good for government to be working hard to try to support economies and households during this period. But businesses that aren't confident don't invest. They don't invest in people, they don't invest in new capex and in infrastructure, and businesses that aren't investing, right? Well, we can't express surprise that they're no bigger tomorrow than they were today. And of course, it's just the sum of all businesses that get us to the size of economies. And the same thing is true for household and household confidence. So we saw the worst household confidence figures in 35 years released in South Africa yesterday. And that survey wasn't taken in April when the economy was in near total lockdown. It wasn't taken in May as we started to ease. It was taken in the first half of June, when in some sense, sort of a fair bit of normality here and there has returned. And it's still the weakest confidence in 35 years. So those types of spending, sort of investment from business, discretionary spending, bigger ticket spending from households, that's going to recover only very, very slowly through here. A highlight around sort of the health aspects of this in many parts of the continent, certainly here in South Africa, our early innings, I think, against COVID were very strong, but the reality, the need to open up economies to economic activity has meant that the inevitable sharp acceleration of the pandemic itself is now kind of upon us. And it's not a week or two from peaking. We've got a month or two at best where things are looking significantly worse. And there's a question as to what that will do to public health systems, what that will further damage that will do to the economies and others. And then I guess the last point I wanted to make here is just a thought around leverage. So we know that governments are taking on massively more debt. Again, in the rich world where interest rates are kind of plus minus zero, that's a worry, but it's a worry for tomorrow. In those parts of the world, like here in sub-Saharan Africa, like here in South Africa, where interest rates are much higher than zero, all of that extra government debt comes at a very significant future cost. Money that will need to be spent to service that debt, just on interest, is money that can't be spent on other projects, like on infrastructure and the things that will help economies grow more quickly. But it's not just government and government leverage. Households everywhere globally will emerge from this crisis with more leverage on their balance sheets as they look to protect their current spending by trying to move some of that spending forward. And the same thing will be true with business. So a world that exits COVID more leveraged than it entered it will be a world that will tend to grow more slowly in the years ahead than it did before. And so I'm going to leave my formal comments there. And again, apologies for that interruption a little bit earlier. Please let me hand it back over.
Thank you, Jeff. I guess it goes back to health versus economy. We've heard that households have been impacted. I just want to move on to my next speaker. The previous speaker was Anand Naidoo, who looks after a client within ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking. The next speaker is Tudor-Jones, who's a business leader with 26 years experience in the solar energy value chain. I had an opportunity to speak to Dylan's team. Dylan, they say that you have been a great support to them during this crisis. You've managed, to over-communicate so that they're comfortable. and they see you as one of the greatest leaders that they've had. So over to you. It will be great to hear from you how you've managed to navigate during this pandemic, and also, you know, if you can take us through what ABSA has done for you lately. Thank you.
Thanks, Seppo. Thanks for inviting me, and good morning to everybody. So I thought I'd start really just giving people a bit of a context to who Gransolar Group is, so you have a better understanding of what I might say about our challenges in this time. Gransolar Group is a vertically integrated company based with head offices in Spain, but it's a global group. I am the country manager, which looks after the various business interests. And as a group of companies, we really look at servicing the value chain of large-scale photovoltaic projects. We have 4 primary business units: GRS, which does the development, construction and operation and maintenance of power plants. We have PV hardware, which manufactures solar structures and trackers, as well as the software side, which is the SCADA systems, which monitor the solar plants and control the trackers. And ISE, which is an engineering company which offers engineering services, commissioning and quality control services. And lastly, E22, which is a battery storage company, also offering manufacturing as well as doing integration and offering power electronics and EMS systems for power plants. So we have been impacted across the value chain in each business unit in different ways. And I'll start with our construction. We're currently building a new power plant in South Africa, and naturally during the lockdown period when construction was halted, we suffered about an 8-week loss in productivity. That ultimately translates into probably more like 11 or 12 weeks because of the knock-on effect of the manufacturers which are feeding product into the projects with equipment, where some of those manufacturers weren't able to produce or ship. So it delayed the delivery of the inverters, the trackers, and even the modules. It was just bad timing. With the travel bans also, we're anticipating that we might face challenges in the future with regard to bringing in the skilled experts from Spain in order to do the final commissioning on various activities on the plants. And naturally, we've had to increase our PPE, which has been a cost to the project and slowed things down to an extent in terms of our health and safety on site. The operating businesses have had to overnight, because we literally have to keep the lights on, we've had to introduce and develop business continuity planning around COVID specifically. That was successfully implemented. It stretched us and actually tested us to see to what extent we could actually continue operating a plant with the minimum amount of staff compared to business as usual. We've successfully been able to do that, and now that we're out of level 5 and 4, we've reintroduced staff back to site. There is an additional cost to us, however, because of social distancing, staff transport is not the same. We're having to ensure that people are not sitting on top of each other as they would normally be in a bus on the way to work. And at the same time, we take seriously any kind of flu symptoms. And moving into winter, there's an overlap of flu symptoms with COVID symptoms. So when people do you report on dry coughs, etc., they sent home and until further notice, just to not affect the potential operation of the plants and their colleagues at work. So it's affected those businesses. PV hardware, unfortunately, as a supplier to all EPCs globally, has also been knocked with non-payments. As with our construction project, where we haven't been able to deliver according to time schedules, a number of other EPCs globally have had the same construction delays, which has had a knock-on effect on the value chain. The commissioning services of our engineering house are going to be affected. We're trying to put plans in place to see how we can localize the skills or put in some form of plan B, because when it comes to commissioning the plants, we can't get the skilled staff to South Africa. So that's how ISE is ultimately affected right now. And E22 has had some battery project delays, in that the clients were about to pull the trigger on making decisions. Those decisions have been put off. In doing so, there's been a negative fluctuation in the exchange rates for the imported components, and it's also brought into, brought up the project viability. So across the value chain, we've been affected. Globally, we envisage through recent market research that the global activities in terms of projections for 2020 were 140 gigawatts for 2020. There is a projection of a down of less, around 30 gigawatts less of installed capacity this year, which is actually 15 gigawatts less than 2019. So we will be affected globally. As a group, as Anand mentioned earlier, we at an early stage have diversified the pillars of our company. So we're still strong in that there may be a downturn, but we've got various pillars holding up the group. And we have seen that the trend in South Africa is moving towards private PPA. So there's a lot. Our tendering team hasn't slowed down at all. We've actually increased our activities in terms of tendering, because there's been multiple private PPA opportunities, specifically out of the mining sector in South Africa, as well as cross-border in the SADC region. And what we're also seeing is that there's an increase in the interest in battery technology. Again, Indian Ocean Islands being the drivers of that, and off-grid mining. Where ABSA's come in to assist is we've been very, very blessed really with the support given to us from ABSA, and that it's been extremely personalized and proactive. Our coverage bank who looks after our accounts, Toli Nene, is constantly in touch with our financial manager. I'd say probably twice a month at least, there's calls which happen in terms of following up on our pipeline of opportunities and where and how ABSA can get involved to hold our hand and assist us. So it's really that kind of personal relationship banking that one would expect, and it's really great to have a single point of contact for any one of our needs. And our needs vary depending on the business units, from bonding through to asset finance, overdraft facilities. When the COVID hit, there was a phone call immediately to say, okay, what's happening with your construction projects? Do you need any bridging finance to cover any of the shortfalls and payments that you might have in terms of your cash flow forecasting, which is obviously now going to go, a bit astray. So we've been very, very blessed to have that partner with us, holding our hand along the route. And even to the extent that the London office, Bavtik, who's the head of power and utilities and infrastructure, visited our office in Spain, met with our CFO, and also just to get a better understanding of what our global needs are and how that can filter down to the South African business units. And I think an unusual and unexpected but welcome recent event was ABSA actually introducing us to one of the ABSA clients, where they saw synergies between the parties, which may transpire into future business. So overall, we are now considering migrating all of our company accounts across to ABSA, because previously they had been spread among some of the other banking commercial banks in the country. In short, I think in terms of where we're going as an industry, the Gransolar Group is a young and agile and a dynamic group of companies, and if one doesn't adapt in today's times, it's going to determine whether you succeed or fail. So adaptability is key right now. We don't suffer from the bureaucracy and red tape of larger organizations, and our leaders, our directors, our managers if we need to change direction, we need to change the direction of the ship, which we're going to have to do. We kind of roll up our sleeves and change direction, and we're doing so. And having ABSA as a partner to navigate these turbulent seas is a blessing for us, and we do appreciate the relationship. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dylan. We've heard from Dylan, we've heard about who Gransolar is, and I think we've heard about the role that ABSA has played in terms of partnering with the client, with Gransolar. So for those global corporates that have dialed in, ABSA Bank is the bank to partner with. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Yasmin Masithela. She's Managing Executive, Transactional Banking. She'll be speaking to us about ABSA's initiatives being carried out across the African continent in response to COVID-19 and the collaboration with global development organizations. ABSA is playing a huge role externally through the Force for Good workstream that she leads. Yasmin is a transformational leader who creates a connection with people on a level that increases motivation by setting high expectations, providing support for achieving those expectations, and celebrating the successes. She's also an executive sponsor to Banking on Women, an initiative that was created to support the women within ABSA corporate and investment banking. Over to you, Yasmin.
Thanks, Tsepo. You know, I guess Anand spoke to the work streams that we set up at ABSA level. And certainly the social good work stream has been one that has been pretty active. And I think if you go back to our strategy that we set in 2018, we had a very deliberate purpose. And our purpose in that strategy was about bringing possibilities to life. The underlying social objective to that was taking a deliberate and active role in playing a shaping role in the societies that we actually operate in. So doing good for us is something that we're trying to espouse as part of our ecosystem and part of our growth. And you know, when the pandemic hit, we had to bring that into life. We had to set that in motion and focus on how we were going to help the societies that we were actively participating in, given that you know, the growth forecasts in the regions that we operate in were fast declining, and many of the countries that we operate in were getting to a place where it was clear that we were going into a negative forecast space that Jeff just took us through. From an ABSA perspective, we very quickly determined our focus areas. And our focus areas in terms of leading through COVID-19 were really two focus areas. One was about protecting lives, and this was geared towards protecting lives from a humanitarian sense, trying to get medical supplies, personal protective equipment to both the frontline staff as well as vulnerable groups. And the second was about protecting livelihoods. And this was about keeping the economy running. And with a clear focus on supporting our customers and clients and the social systems that we operate within. I think to ensure that we had an impactful protecting lives initiatives, we partnered with our clients, we partnered with government organizations, NGOs, GDOs, and national disaster relief organizations to ensure that we could have an impact that could be felt across our jurisdiction. To date, at a group, we've invested over 49.5 million into our COVID response in both South Africa and in our countries outside of South Africa, our ABSA regional operations. And if I can just give you a sense of how we came up with those numbers, it really was about just translating to how we as individuals in the banking sector could contribute together with our corporate to the communities that we are serving. Our group CEO and some of our executive directors and prescribed officers took 33% of their salaries for a 3-month period and used that to transfer to the Solidarity Fund and our ABSA Trust Fund to raise some funds. And within the corporate and investment banking space, we rallied together colleagues who were interested in helping us drive some of these initiatives. And together we were able to come up with a fundraising initiative which involved colleagues giving up or donating some of their accumulated leave towards the activity that we would have and initiatives that we have around protecting lives, and the corporate and investment bank would match fund that, and we were able to raise just under 8 million rand from colleagues directly that we were able to deploy to some of the agencies that we've been working with. To this end, we have to date contributed or purchased just over 360,000 surgical masks that we have given to hospitals that are in the public healthcare system, such as the Addington Hospital, the Freer Hospital in Eastern Cape, and Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital, to advance the ability for the frontline staff to be able to manage this pandemic. From a food security perspective, ABSA has taken a clear position to feed 2 million people, or to raise 2 million meals countrywide over the next 6 months in collaboration with some of our corporate partners and our community organizations, which I think is incumbent on us as responsible corporate citizens to be able to play our part in the crisis. We were very clear that we weren't going to stand back. We were going to be part of the solution to managing the current problems, because we have insights into the fact that this pandemic will be with us for a while, and the economic impacts are going to fast stay with us for the next couple of years. From a relief program perspective, and in terms of protecting livelihoods for our client base, we embarked on the ABSA payment relief program, which was very well received. It was by far one of the most comprehensive payment initiatives in the industry, and it focused largely on our retail and small business companies. We were able to provide support to 584,000 account holders with relief of up to 8 billion rand of cash flow relief over the 3-month period from the retail and business bank. From the corporate and investment banking space, Anand spoke to this earlier. Again, very close to our clients, understanding our clients' needs, and we've been able to support clients with a substantial amount of money over this period to help them keep their businesses alive. And we've also offered some moratoriums, and covenant requests have been granted to some of our corporate clients. In consultation with the Oppenheimer Foundation, we've also been actively involved with the South African Future Trust initiative they have under the Enterprise Development banner, where they are also supporting small businesses. And to date, we have expended about 64 million of SAFT funds to about 11.7 million beneficiaries. And I think it's just humbling when you see the feedback from some of the clients, just being really thankful that they were able to feed their children, because it was quite bleak for a moment there. We've also worked very closely with the Banking Association of South Africa, and have been involved with supporting the UIF in streamlining its processes and de-risking its processes around disbursements that they have in their space. And we're also working very closely with the South African Security Agency with the special grants program that was announced by President some time ago. And we're also involved with the 200 billion government guaranteed funding from National Treasury, with various parts of our business being actively involved in those initiatives. I think that from an Arrow perspective, again, a very clear focus on what the need is. In this instance, we partnered closely with our global development organizations, looking at various factors on determining where we could channel our resources and channel our focus to. We looked at country population sizes, the country's own donation initiatives, infection rates, affordability, and we have been working with some of our client networks in our countries outside of South Africa to be able to get global aid to where it's needed, given that with the shutdowns, the normal approaches that our global development organizations would take were not easily available, and they would still need to keep their own initiatives running in the circumstances. So we needed to put the ecosystem together to try and make sure that we could get an outcome that would be able to help both our countries and our colleagues. And I think, we've been able to expend over the last couple of months, 19 million over the last few months to our countries in Kenya, in Botswana, in Mozambique, in the Seychelles, in Ghana, in Mauritius, Tanzania, just getting thermometers to schools, getting PPE and masks to hospitals, getting ventilators in some instances, getting testing kits or mobile testing units in many of our spaces. And I think, we've really been committed and focused on championing and being a part of the governments and solutions towards this crisis in many of the spaces that we're in. I think, this crisis has tested us. It's tested us as leaders. It's tested us as corporate organizations. We've had to rethink the way we normally do things. We've had to understand that something different has to happen. And we also recognize that in many instances, we won't go back to a new normal, to a normal. This will be our new normal. I think personally, we've been tested as leaders. We know that we have to be a lot more empathetic. We've learned that. We have to be agile in our response. We have to expect unexpected U-turns. We have to develop good listening skills. And we also have to understand what's happening in our own ecosystems to be able to actively and proactively manage the societal impact in those spaces. I mean, I can give a list of a whole host of other initiatives that we've been involved in. We have donated some of our trading commissions through the Trade for Solidarity program, but I don't want to leave you thinking that we're running a whole battery of individual activities. We really are focused on protecting lives and protecting livelihoods. And in terms of our own management and our own internal management of the ABSA space, we're using some of our SMMEs to help us with PPE that we would need in our own space to stay true towards keeping the protecting livelihoods, the story alive. But that's been our story, and I think it's been quite a journey, and I don't think it's over. I think that we keep stretching ourselves to try and figure out how we can have a more sustainable and better societal impact, because we do believe that organizations that don't have a higher purpose, that are not looking to be impactful in the societies that they're in, may not have a future, given what we've just experienced and will continue to experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. Our story as ABSA is one of people coming together and reflecting on what matters the most. And I quote, you mentioned bringing possibilities to life and leading through protecting lives and keeping the economy running. That's one amazing work that ABSA has been doing during COVID. Thank you for that. I'm gonna hand over to Manuela. I think we've come to the end of our speakers and we're moving on to questions. Thank you.
Epple, thank you so very much for this, and to all of our speakers. Thank you. Kolisile Nene has just posted to everyone where he says that the master of all invention is calamity, and that is so true. And then he actually, Kolisile further states, is what are some of the processes or systems you have introduced in your business during COVID-19 that you believe will differentiate you in the future? And is this to all business leaders? And this question is to all the business leaders on the panel, please. Kolisile, thank you. It's a very good question.
I'm happy to answer from a group or Gransolar perspective. I think what it's made us realize is that we need to embrace technology more, because we have managed to negotiate 2 contracts during this period without setting foot in the lawyers' offices. It's also brought our cost structure down to an extent, although it's cost us on the one hand, it's reduced our costs in terms of the typical travel costs that are incurred to have to engage on meetings on a national and international basis. So there's definitely going to be a change which will stay in future in that regard. Regarding business processes, the business units in Madrid have realized that, well, I think it was 2 years ago, we relocated our offices in Madrid to larger offices to accommodate the growth and expansion of the company. But now what they're realizing is that maybe it was, counterintuitive, because people have been able to work successfully from home without having to, and it hasn't necessarily jeopardized our productivity. As managers, we've had to change the way in which we manage our staff as such. But as I mentioned earlier, our tendering team hasn't slowed down by any means. Everybody's has been working from home. I'm currently in our Johannesburg office alone because the staff are still at home and still working hard. So in terms of space and the necessity for working in large office environments, I think that's going to change. Maybe we'll be moving towards hot desking and only necessarily coming into the office as and when required for face-to-face meetings, or on a regular basis, really just to touch base. But I think these are things that are going to stay in the future.
Yeah. Thanks, Dylan. Maybe if I can come in and give you a few more comments over and above what I mentioned from an ABSA perspective. I did mention the culture piece that underpins everything that we do. But the slant that we're also looking at is creating an entrepreneurial culture. And how do we empower all our staff to take those risks and embrace innovation in this new environment. The second piece, which you just mentioned, is obviously cost, and how do we create a very much a cost-efficient business. The third piece is digital innovation, and by that we mean, in the sort of e-commerce environment, the front-end capability, so to speak, as a bank, and how can that be far more effective and efficient for our clients. But linked to that is also digital servicing. So how do we service our clients in a far more seamless way that's online and digital in nature. Also payments as a service model is something that we're focusing on, and innovative products that are emerging from clients' needs, as I mentioned previously. The last piece, which I've also mentioned, is obviously the opportunities that's come through various M&A opportunities, divestitures, and strategic partnerships. But overall, what we would really like to be involved is in partnership with clients like yourselves, where we can actually innovate jointly with yourselves, where we can put together what we call lock-on relationships rather than lock-in relationships, where we can get involved in your clients' ecosystems and develop value propositions that can be far more effective than just selling you a single product.
Thank you very much, Anand. And I must say, I've been hearing what ABSA is doing, and ABSA has a very positive culture in the way that it works in partnership with its clients. And I really want to thank you for that right now, because I think it's a learning curve for all of us. We don't have to be big corporates to work with each other, support each other, especially during a pandemic situation that we find ourselves in globally. I think before, and we've got a few more minutes left, I'd really like to open the floor to anyone else who has a question to any of the speakers. Okay, I see that nothing is coming through. So what I'd like to say right now is I really want to thank the ABSA team, Anand, Sepo, Yasmin. This has been a really good session. Jeff, you've empowered us with so much information, which will help us to manage some of our business and mitigate risks going forward. And to Dylan, thank you so much as well for sharing with us what you are doing. Sepo, thank you now for putting up a contact slide on where people can now connect with you. However, what I do want to share with everyone, we will be sharing Jeff's slides and all the slides from ABSA with these contact details going forward. And if you do find yourself in any situation, please get hold of ABSA. They are a very good corporate support. They are empowered with a lot of information and they can assist you in many, many ways. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending the webinar today, and we look forward to hosting you at the next webinar. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Manuela.
Thank you.
And thank you to Siyabonga Mbanjwa, who's one of our directors and treasurer as well, that I've seen has got onto the line. Thank you so much for participating here. Everybody, keep well, keep safe until we meet again soon online. Bye-bye.